Hello, hello, hello. Good evening. It's almost night, right? First of all, I'd like to thank you for still being with us. It's a milestone at this time, so it's great. You're going to have a very interesting panel coming. Come on, guys, join me. We're going to have a very interesting panel about the future of cities, which means a lot of different things. And do we have 5 minutes, really? I think we need a bit more than 5 minutes. Do you want to sit? I'm not going to be sitting here. Okay, fine. Yeah. All right, fair enough. Oh, that's comfortable. So I asked Agnia if we could get a drink on stage, because I think it's proper at 6 o'clock to get a drink, but I think it's a little bit too early. You guys are going to go and have a drink with me very soon. I want to introduce you to the panelists that we have today. First of all, my name is Raph. For those who haven't seen me on stage already, I'm from Startupbootcamp. We invest in a lot of young companies around the world. Smart city is one of the topics that we're looking into. Actually, we have one in Dubai and one in Amsterdam, specifically around smart city. And I'm all about IoT, which means that, I care about the smartness of it all. But the topic of today is not about the technology. And you'll get to see with my panelists that we're going to actually touch on many different other specific topics around cities in general. I'm going to ask you two to introduce yourself. Don't spend too much time, but just 2 minutes. Mr. G, do you want to start?
My name is Gaute Hagerup. I work for Innovation Norway, which is the Norwegian government's main tool for scaling up Norwegian technology companies worldwide. So my area of responsibility at Innovation Norway is to work with smart cities and sustainable cities.
Thank you. Mr. V.
Mr. V. My name is Viesturs Celmiņš. It's difficult to pronounce, but it's a name nevertheless. I'm an anthropologist that works in urban planning, and I try to work and bring human perspective and human-centered planning into the conventional urban planning. And in my day-to-day job, I work in University of Latvia. Is now building a new campus on the left side of this left bank of this city, and it's going to have about 12 to 15,000 people there in about 3 or 4 years, and that's how I spend my days.
Okay, so as you can see, we have a diverse panel. On one side, people working specifically in the field. On the other side, people thinking about the citizens. So I want to start with you. Specifically, one of the things that I'm interested in understanding is your vision of a smart city, or as we discussed before, what is smart, what is not so smart, and what is basically the framework you could put around a smart city?
Well, I'm fairly critical and partial to all the hype with the smart cities these days. I think there's a lot of nerds in California that think they're the best architects and planners, and basically the city has been invented with them, even though we've had them around for a couple of thousand of years. And oftentimes I think you have a smart city, there are fragmented aspects of technology and sensors in the city thrown together. But I think a smart city, or smart city 1.0, what I call it, is one that has human scale, livability, cycling, pedestrians, and public transport at its core. That is green and it's blue. And once you have those fundamentals at place, then you can build and scale up from there.
And so at the core of that reflection, we'll go back to it in a minute, is the citizen, right? So
I mean, the human scale is number one. So do I feel attracted? Do I feel safe? Do I feel at home? Do I feel at ease? In other words, is this a good place for people watching? If as a social animal, if I'm in a space and I'm happy to sit there for a while drinking my coffee, that should be a good assessment or good criteria if the space is livable and attractive. And it doesn't matter you have drones or e-cars or what have you, sensors or solar panels. That's just an instrument for making a place more livable or less livable.
Okay. On your side, I think we discussed that you have an interesting vision of the 3 pillars around the smart city. You want to expand on that a little bit?
Yes, I think it's interesting what you said, Mr. V, regarding this topic of the notion of the smart. I mean, it seems to me that we've been focusing so much on, the technological part, the sensors, the network, the big data analytics, all these things. But I think it's time we look upon, maybe we should swap the term. Maybe we should talk about livable cities, or sustainable cities, or happy living places. So I would like to, when I work with this, I more and more get the understanding of it's 3 pillars, as you say, that I really like when looking at this. And pillar number 1 is the citizens' involvement thing. that the city itself, the city municipality, the city doesn't exist, there are people in there, but the city municipality need to involve its citizens in its way forward. Very much like the way that we teach startups to be very close to the first customer to understand where to develop the technology. The city municipality itself needs to be very close to its citizens to understand where and what direction should our city take. So that is pillar number one. And pillar number two, for me, I see, is the public-private partnership, meaning that the city itself need to, when having had this dialogue and discussed with its citizens, need to transform this over to defined needs that it can invite technological, innovative companies to come and develop solutions to it. And it cannot do it itself. It needs to do it with a partnership with the private, innovative people or companies. And that pretty much points to my third pillar, which is collaboration. And I think collaboration not only between the public and the private entities, but of course also between cities, because I mean the cities need to create the larger market. So collaboration in so many directions. So I think maybe I agree with you very much that the notion of smart can be replaced with a deeper understanding of other things than just technology.
Do you want to add something?
I think there is a Radiohead song. It's called "Meeting People is Difficult." I think that's the whole thing about cities. If you don't have smart citizens, you don't have a smart city. If you don't have a smart government, you don't have a smart city. It's about people at the end of the day, not the drones, not the tech. You can have autonomous vehicle, autonomous driven bus. If the transit route is poorly planned, it's still a poorly planned transit system. It doesn't matter if there's no driver in there. So you have to have the human element there.
I agree. All right, so as a matter of fact, I wanted to just get onto the real things in a moment. So talk about concrete examples that you've seen that have been working in a city recently, and maybe also talk to us about a failure that you had recently seen and it could be a city, it could be at the state level, it could be at a, it doesn't matter. It's a city, it's just a framework in itself. But any success and failures? Do you want to start?
Yeah. Start with a very typical failure that I've seen in my city, in Oslo, is when they launched the idea of making the city center free of cars, which is an excellent idea, of course. I mean, you want to have space for walking. One of the things they did was to remove the parking lots that are alongside the streets, and instead they put benches up there so that people could sit down. I mean, symbolically, it's a good idea. But have you ever thought that you really want to sit on a bench right next to a park meter or just alongside the street? Is that really where you want to sit down? I think this is a misunderstanding of, this is where it comes in, this thing of you need to talk to people, understand. One thing is to take away the cars. Another question is, where do you really want to sit? Maybe not there. So that's one failure. But another good example, I think, is what we have reached a really, really impressive amount of electrical vehicles in Oslo. And I think the success story behind that, just one number, this year, 2017, 30% of all the new cars being sold in Oslo are electrical. So it's really, really huge thing. And the city municipality have reached it due to a number of complementary incentives. One incentive is, of course, to take away the tax on electrical vehicles, so it is cheaper to buy it. Another incentive, just that incentive itself may not be enough, because another incentive they introduced was with an electric car you can drive in the bus lane, so you pass by the traffic. A third incentive was that you could have free parking. A fourth was that they provided you with free electrical charging in the city if you came into the city with this vehicle. A fourth incentive is that if you are a company that rents out cars, then you are tax-free if you rent out electrical vehicles, and so on. So there's so many incentives that you use the word nudging, and I like that and I think we will change when we have sufficiently sets of incentives, and I think in a way they have succeeded with that.
Can I just make a quick survey in the room? So raise your hand. Who in this room owns a car? Now keep your hands up if you own an electric car. Yeah, see what I'm talking about here?
One down
There's
there.
about 2 here. So that shows you that there's still a massive amount of work to be done. Now, the next question will be, do you want to actually own a car or you don't anymore, right? So that's the next question, because particularly in the world of smart cities as we understand it, the less, the more the new generation coming up don't want to own anything. They want to rent, they want to, allocate, they want to use, they want to share, whatever that is, but they probably don't want to own a car. It's a dead asset as we know it. So in what you were just saying, this is where the public-private partnership is critical to enable those cities to have that infrastructure in place, not only for parking and charging, but also to allow citizens to be able to share their resources. Do you want to give us an example as well on your side?
Speaking of shared mobility, I think in 2018, Amsterdam, which again is one of the top gear cities, and I think there's also a 2-lane situation with there are big cities that are driving the game, and there are small cities, a couple of 100,000 people, which are way behind as far as the initiatives go. So the Amsterdam region and Randstad, they're now opening up a pitch for all sorts of things that relate to shared mobility and saying whoever wants to come forward to create an interface, a platform for shared mobility, who wants to provide fleets, who wants to provide charging stations, who wants to provide ideas for sharing and parking, come forward. In other words, not these separated, fragmented initiatives all over the place where each startup is fighting another one, but we're creating a platform, which I think you mentioned earlier, that in some ways the municipalities have to learn from platform businesses. There are no other businesses than platform businesses these days. All of them are platform businesses or they're out. Right? So the governments have to take clues, and the startups have to take clues how to speak to the governing bodies in the cities, so that they will become more platform-like, and then use that platform to enable smart initiatives where they're necessary, where the customer pain is, rather than whatever someone told on TEDx.
When you mentioned this about platforms, I think it's really interesting also to bring into the discussion the topic of business models, that the municipalities need to figure out the business model that makes it profitable.
Municipalities' business.
Yes.
Does that actually work together?
That's a good question. But the concept of business model, I think, works for everyone. I read just a very interesting example from Germany here, where they had this huge challenge of public toilets. And they spend an amount, I don't know, some million euros each year in each city to set up and clean and keep them good, And so they figured out, instead of setting up our own public toilets and spending money on cleaning them, we offer cafeterias and restaurants who are willing to open up their toilet for public. We offer them an amount of money. And you put a sign in your window that this is a public toilet. But the cafeteria gets, 200 euros a month or something for the municipality. But the point is that at the end of the day, they cut their public toilet budget into...
Did it work?
And it worked.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow, in Germany. It must be Germany.
It must be discipline.
It must be the Germans.
But that's when I talk about business models. For the public budgets also need to rethink how they spend their money and how they can save money.
So that's a pretty surprising, success on
It is.
that front. Any spectacular failures you've seen on the smart city front recently, on one side or the other? We talked a little bit about that, but anything you want to share?
I wanted to just, before I forget, I think there was we're now a society that is, 7 seconds while something is loading is very long for most of the people in the 20s and 30s. So an idea that something could take up to 2 to 3, 4 years is unfathomable. If you look at this, the history of cities, 2, 3 years is nothing for a city. A street, or a park, or nothing. It's
very quick.
So now, if you think that you have to roll out 2 or 3 years to get something done, there's a large discrepancy between what people are expecting and what people can, put on the ground. I think this is especially difficult for the startup people, who don't like to wait at all. And the idea that they have to deal with governments, I think they went into startup business first, so they wouldn't have to deal with governments at all. In politics, forget about it. And I think this is a hard lesson will have to be learned, that you can't do cities or disrupt cities without the politicians there. They will make sure you'll have to deal with them.
So I want to comment on that, because I think this is a critical element that, how many of you are startups in that room? Working on smart city as well? Keep your hands up. 1, okay, 2. I'm based in London, and we have a certain element of entities that are working specifically around how to render London smarter. I don't think it's smart at all, but they think it is already, and they want to get it smarter. So they're working on a few different elements. One of the things that they look into is those private-public partnerships that they've done at the borough level, which again is fragmented, and we'll come back to fragmentation in a minute. But the other thing they do is they have special envoy in those different municipalities to work with young innovators. And what they do is they not only bring the technology up, but they embrace it from the get-go, as in if the technology is brought inside the borough, then they have a commitment to implement it and test it. It doesn't mean it's going to be scalable, it doesn't mean it's going to be scaled up, but at least they will test it. And this way, they kill the barriers of implementation. If it works, and it happened to be working many, many times around, then you have a direct engagement with the City of London. Now, great partnership, you can imagine. The thing that most of the time is critical in that space, as we know, is the data and what we do with the data, right? So one of the key topics that we've had around smart city is open data and use of open data. Some cities are really for it, some other cities are absolutely against it, and there's no real policy around this. Have you seen any of that reflected in any of the solutions you've talked about recently?
Well, you asked for failures. I mean, that is obviously one.
Talk about Uber.
Yes.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. Now, I mean, there are so many, frontiers. There are so many regions, so many municipalities with their own sets of data, with their own sets of, I like the word, but the structure of the data that do not communicate with each other. Municipalities next to each other that have data for transportation that do not mix. And I mean, this itself is one of the hugest challenges that we face in order to succeed with anything in the smart city. And in a way, maybe it's easier in smaller countries. I don't know, like Latvia or Norway, or maybe even that's not.
It's easier in more regulated spaces.
Yes.
And we'll get to regulation in a minute, because it can be an enabler or a crippler, depending on how you look at it. Dubai is a good example for that. Go ahead.
You had a fantastic example, I think, which deserves much more credit than what has been said here. That when he said every borough needs to have may use a technology and it has to implement it, I think that's absolutely crucial. Because imagine what did it take us to grow to using this thing? It took us 10 years, and it took Apple how many tries to get it right? And we think we're going to adopt smart technologies into municipalities just like that. Well, that's nonsense. That's a very, very shallow view of culture, and a very, very naive view of the fact that we are creatures of habit. And then, the politicians or clerks work in institutions. It takes time for them to adopt something. They need to fail several times before they start believing things. And unless you're able to get that openness that people have in startups, unless people have more of that mentality in the governments, there's going to be a clash, and there's going to be disruption in ongoing inertia. It took Oslo for a while to have those several nudges at once. Public free parking, using the bus lane, charging stations, and fiscal incentives. It didn't take one; it took 4 at least. There probably even more before the choice was obvious. Oh, I'm going for the Nissan Leaf or whatever the models are out there, Teslas and etc. Priuses and etc. It's a couple. It's a couple because people they're sticky to their choices, and you need to have both at the customer level and the governance level, and then that's a recipe of we have these fantastic initiatives happening in our municipality. You have to have a background of 6 to 7 failures, right, before you get going.
And one very interesting topic in this discussion also is public procurement and the laws and regulations on how the municipality, what they're allowed to actually buy and not. But I think it's very important to actually realized that the EU has a new set of regulations, I think, as of this year, which allows for innovative procurements. That means that you don't have to buy something that is proven to work. You can buy something based on a description of your needs, and then you can invite companies in to assist in developing a solution to that need. So the point is that the legislation is there, ready to be used, but now we're talking about what you just mentioned, the slow change of habits for the people working there. You know, do I really dare to start using this legislation? Am I the first one to start using it? And if that's going to happen, then you need a leader on top of that organization that really drives that forward and say, I want this to happen, and I stand behind you for all the mistakes you do. So we're facing, I mean, as you say, this kind of it's a very, very slow materia, this culture thing. But we're facing actually the fact that public entities need to get this innovation spirit and daring to take these steps inside of their bodies.
Guys, we're going to be very close to the end, but I want to potentially allow you, we're going to finish on a few more topics, but I want to allow you to have 1 or 2 questions, so think about the questions you want to ask in a minute. To close on what we discussed, there's tons of different topics that we could be having right now. The one thing that I'm thinking, right, the current sort of different sort of goals that we should aim at having to allow a city to be smarter and what the future of cities should look like, in addition to having an impactful, positive impact on the citizens, obviously, is, as we discussed, is having the right partnership put in place between private and public, having access to the citizens' will to make sure that they can actually, not only adopt it in a reasonable manner, but also recognize that it's going to take more than just, getting used to a simple technology. And last but not least is having some sort of regulatory bodies that allows to implement those things with security, and because we didn't touch, by the way, on security, which is another key topic, could have spent the whole panel on this, with security and privacy for the use of the data that we have through those tools. Do you guys want to close on each of you 1 or 2 key messages there?
Oh, it's a tough one. I think as far as the data goes, you picked it up, and I think there's an anecdote going around on Eisenhower going back in Pentagon in 1960s, and there is way too much data about USSR that they could ever possibly work at, and that's 1960s. You can imagine how much of data that they have about USSR or Russia, in 2017. There's a data deluge. We have way too much data we can work on. So I think that the critical capacity is to grow smart governance, people with enough courage and vision, and second is to grow the culture of smart citizens. That we have the similar the similar culture and mindset the startups embody in order to succeed. So more of that into the general population, rather than these small pockets of very, very high levels of intelligence, very, very high levels of risk-taking and resilience, and very low of those in general population. If we can level that out, everyone's a winner. It's a party. Ricky, Madonna, whatever have you.
Maybe one advice for the entrepreneurs out there?
Don't avoid the government. Don't avoid the politics, because the city, if you have a flourishing city, everyone's a winner. And if you have a failing city with all these poor decisions obvious for all of you, your startup is going to grow. You find a market, and if your customers are smart, your business is growing. If your customer is dumb, your business is obviously not going to grow, because it's a limited horizon and perspective.
Final last words. The same as my introductory words. I think there's 3 pillars that you need to focus on. Is the citizens' involvement, is the partnership with the public entities, and a little anecdote here, the public entities need to reach out and define their needs, not define their solutions. And then the third thing is collaboration. So, yeah.
Great. Guys, any questions in the audience? Raise your hands. Come on, don't be shy. Anything. Data, security, color of our jeans, whatever. Nothing?
There's one?
Yeah, one. Thank you. Boombox coming your way.
Shaft.
Hello. Wow. I have a question to Viesturs. Do you see progress in Riga in terms of smart governance and smart citizenship? Thanks.
Well, do I see progress as far as the smart city goes in Riga? Well, I think that for those of you here, obviously you all are in the area you are because you love the wicked problems. Well, the city is the most wicked of problems there is because it's the most complex organism, I don't know, beyond brain. So if you can work the city out, you can work other things out. Now to the question, since I define smart through the livable and human scale, not through the gadgets and drone farms and sensors, I think the city has become a little more livable and a little more humane than it was, I would say, 10 years ago. Yet, with the population that we have right now, which is absolutely impatient, and 3 years is a millennium for them, no, we don't have enough progress. We don't have sufficient progress where other cities are experimenting in much larger scale and taking bigger risks and failing more, and hopefully failing forward. And we're not even failing yet, so I think we need to reach that stage. Is that an answer?
Thank you. Any other questions? Well, if not, then I guess the good news is we're done, and the better news is you are going to have a drink very soon. So thank you very much for being here with us today. Big round of applause for our panelists. Thank you.